Access to Democracy is made possible thanks to the following organizations. Recalibra Health, a new nationwide telehealth platform designed to provide safe and effective health and wellness products at affordable prices. Available products include compound GLP-1 for weight loss, as well as multiple medications for men's and women's health and hair loss, all administered under the direct supervision of expert physicians, nurse practitioners, and physician assistants. Visit recalibrahealth.com for more information. Sheridan and Dulas, PA, a family and criminal defense law firm, has been serving clients in Dakota County and throughout Minnesota for over 40 years. Ranked a Tier 1 Best Law Firm by U.S. News & World Report every year since 2009. Sheridan and Dulas are here to help you in your most difficult life circumstances. Learn more at ssdpa.com. Established in 2007 and based in New Richmond, Wisconsin, 45th Parallel Distillery was among the first 50 micro distilleries in the United States. All aspects of production occur at their facility. If you're interested in learning more about the 45th Parallel Distillery, please check their website and plan a visit to tour their facility and taste their spirits. 45thParallelDistillery.com. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has been proudly serving its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org.
Welcome to another edition of Access to Democracy. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Bill Raker. Today we're going to be talking about history. In fact, talking history. What can we learn from it? And here to share his perspective is a great historian himself, Frank Sachs. Frank, welcome back to Access to Democracy.
Well, it's great to be back and great to be talking about history because we all know history matters.
Well, I want to ask you, I've heard the phrase, history repeats itself. Do you think that's true?
Not exactly, but I do think it echoes.
Well, that's a different perspective. Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't come back quite the same, but there's still something you should be listening to.
And you're going to tune us into what that is today, right?
I hope to.
Okay, great. So, Frank, you've been an educator all of your life, I believe. Is that right?
That is correct.
How did all of that start, and what brought you to where you are today doing these fantastic things that you're doing?
Well, when I was a young boy, I got turned on to history. I had a third grade teacher who introduced me to the great explorers, and the next thing I knew, I was just reading one biography after another, and I fell in love with history, and specifically American history. So as I grew up, I kept thinking about what is it I'd like to do, and somewhere in the middle of my college experience, it dawned on me, I think I should be in the classroom. I think I should be sharing what I love, which is teaching, and hopefully encouraging other people to enjoy history and enjoy learning about our government and how it's supposed to work.
And so you spent some time at the Blake School, is that right?
Spent the vast majority of my career at the Blake School. I taught there 37 years, and when I retired, I got rewired, and the League of Women Voters asked me to come and be their 4th of July speaker, which I thought, well, I've been teaching AP US Government and Politics for the last dozen years. I think I can talk about this. And I did, and the next morning I got 2 phone calls. The programmer for community education in Burnsville and the director of the Edina Senior Center called me and asked me if I'd come teach classes to adults. And a whole new career took off.
And you're still going?
I'm actually talking all over the Twin Cities.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, you had been a guest on our program, and I was so intrigued by your perspective and the knowledge of history that you're able to articulate so well that I have to have Frank come back on and talk some more about what he's been doing. So after you retired from your official job,
Right.
you took up the, can we call it a gig that you've taken up?
Yeah.
And it's kind of unique what you've been doing. Tell us about some of those things.
I got started and I eventually had to call it something. So I call it Frank Talking History, and you can look it up on the internet. And I started presenting classes, and then people asked me to come talk about topics, and the next thing you know, I'm speaking at senior communities, I'm teaching in community education, I'm in Lakeville, then I'm in Hudson, Wisconsin, then I'm up in Centennial. I'm literally being asked to speak all over the Twin Cities about history or government. I have a couple of different classes that I can teach on American foundations, but also disputed elections, or one that I've been doing this last spring is in both Burnsville and Lakeville and Edina. We're watching Ken Burns's American Revolution. We watch 1 hour, and then we talk about that hour. And I help break it down for everybody so that we get a deeper understanding about these events, and we find out there's a lot of surprises in history, things we didn't know.
And so you said that you focus on American history, history of the United States. Okay?
Absolutely.
And government of the United States.
Yes.
How intertwined are those two topics, Frank?
History and government?
Yes.
Well, quite intertwined. The American story is unique because it's the first real republic, and by that we're talking about a democratic republic. It took great courage, and it took a lot of rebellious thinking to create our America, because we don't have a king, we don't have a monarch.
We don't want one.
And no, we don't want one. But we had to find a way to govern ourselves, and the only models that were really out there were monarchs. George III, Louis XVI. This is what the world knew, and we were trying to do something different. Government based on the will of the people, popular sovereignty, and also a government that elects its leaders, but its leaders are filling a position. We aren't electing a leader to be in charge of us for life.
Well, that's an interesting perspective that you have. So what has changed, do you think, with our society from the time of our founding fathers to the current state of affairs?
Well, I actually think who's included has changed the most. We've included more people over the period of time of our history. The first election, 1788, we really only had one candidate, George Washington. And it's an electoral college, and it's the first time they have elections. And of course, they have 13 separate elections because in the Constitution, each state is responsible for conducting its own election. And literally, they believe about 700,000 people might have been eligible to vote. We're talking white males of property, but not all of them actually had enough property. So only about 6% voted in that election. Well, now everybody who's a citizen can vote, and it's literally can be, hundreds of millions of people possibly. We in Minnesota should be proud because we have led the nation 10 of the last 13 elections in terms of voter turnout, which is quite spectacular.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
We had 77% at the last election that led the nation.
So is one of the most important things that a citizen can do is vote?
Absolutely. And they should be informed before they vote. Don't just watch ads on TV. Take the time to read or to research your candidates, what they stand for, so you know what you're voting for. And the great thing about America and what the Founding Fathers did is they were very concerned about putting too much power in people's hands. So they made it so we had an election every 2 years. So that means if we don't like the government, we can replace it every 2 years.
So, in other words, we are responsible for the government that we have, whatever it turns out to be. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We should take ownership of that. And it's quite an empowering thing. I think that's why so many people have wanted to vote or expand the vote throughout our history. I mean, the first state to issue universal white male suffrage was Massachusetts. And that's about 1800 that they do that. But then blacks advocated for the vote, women advocated for the vote, Native Americans wanted the vote. And each of them got it in time. So over time, we've expanded the franchise, as it's called. And it's important that you find out who will represent you. And we don't have a direct democracy except when we vote for constitutional amendments. We have a representative democracy.
Which is different than, it's a republic, as what you said.
We are a republic and we don't have a parliament. So we're not voting for a party, we're voting for a candidate.
For the people.
For the people.
Government of the people, by the people, for the people.
Right. Thank you, Abraham Lincoln, in the Gettysburg Address. The best definition of democracy, I think, ever expressed was Lincoln.
And we should never forget what that expression is,
yes,
right?
Because it says it all, of, by, for, and the people. And I think it was unique when they wrote the Constitution and they wrote the preamble, Gouverneur Morris, and he said, "We the people." And that was an entirely different viewpoint. It wasn't we, the royal family, or the king, or the aristocracy, and it wasn't what Patrick Henry wanted, we the states. They were putting people in charge of the government, and that's who it reports to. It reports to us.
That was really radical for its time, wasn't it?
It was incredibly radical for its time. Democracy was actually a dirty word in that period of time. They thought it was chaos. And they took the chance that they could control this chaos and focus it and bring us something better. And it didn't happen the first time. The first attempt was the Articles of Confederation after the Treaty of Paris, and they failed spectacularly. So they had to get a handle on this, or we could have been the Balkan states here, you know, everybody fighting with everybody else. But instead, we got it together, and we did something that has lasted 250 years.
It has endured 250 years. And let's use that as a transition,
okay,
Frank, because you serve as a trustee on the board of the Dakota County Historical Society.
That is correct.
And I think you and the society have put together a program or a series of programs to inform the populace about the 250th anniversary and the celebration of it. Tell us what you're doing in that area.
I have connected with the Historical Society, and I have been teaching a monthly class on what I might call American foundations. We started, it's a 14-month program, and we have about 6 more to come. I think I have it down here.
It's the other page.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We started by looking at the Declaration of Independence. We looked at the failures of the Articles. Then we took a deep dive into the Constitution, looking at Articles 1, 2, and 3. But then we had to talk about the Federalist Papers, which helped us define how the government worked. And then we looked at the Bill of Rights, how it came about, what it stands for. Next, we're going to be looking at the Supreme Court. Then we're going to be looking at how our voting rights evolved, how our representation evolved, and then we'll conclude by looking at the Electoral College, why it was designed and how it was supposed to work and how it has been working.
That's a major project.
Yes, it's a commitment. But we've been very pleased. We've had a good group that signed up, and we've had large participation, and it's been happening monthly, and we've actually gathered momentum as we've gone.
And you said you have, what, 7 components, 7 parts of this series remaining to do?
I have about 7 left.
7
yes.
left. So if any of our viewers are interested,
they can go online to the Dakota County Historical Society. I'm trying to remember, our next meeting, I think, is like April 16th. But all of them are there. And the best thing is Town Square Television has been videotaping these and putting them out on their links. So you can find them online in a lot of your local television stations if you want to catch up on the lectures that have already taken place.
So contact information will be scrolling across the screen here as our viewers are having you explain what this is all about. So why is it important that you take the time and invest the energy in putting together a program like this for the citizens, for people? Why is that important for you to do that?
Well, I've always felt it was important to share and important to learn. What I discovered when I retired and started to have this opportunity is that I found that a lot of adults felt they didn't really connect to this when they were 8th graders. And they didn't really understand what the responsibilities were, how the government was constructed, why it works the way it does, and what role they can play. And so over time, it became interesting to me to have so many people, some in their 30s and 40s, but others in their 80s and 90s, come up to me and say, I wish I had learned this in high school. And I said, well, you know it now. Now you know you have to act on it. And they say, yes, I will. And I think that's interesting. They keep saying, I hope my grandchildren, or my great-grandchildren, or my children learn this, because this is so important. We have a responsibility as Americans to actually pay attention to our government, how it operates, and who our representatives are, because it's a unique opportunity, but it's also a unique responsibility, and it's made it for a very open society in terms of how we live and what we think and what we get to say. That's never existed before in the world, but it's existed here for 250 years, and it seems to be on a good path to continue.
Let's hope so.
And let's hope so.
The work that you're doing should help to continue the government that we have here.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's interesting and it's important to stop and think about what is taught to our junior and maybe senior high school students as U.S. history, American history, and civics is really important, because there are countries in the world where they shape the society by what they teach in these history and civics courses. Teaching only what they want the folks to know, maybe not necessarily what they should know. We're lucky here in this country, I think.
Absolutely. I can't say that when I began teaching that I understood or could communicate this as well as I could when I retired from teaching. I was very fortunate in my career to have had opportunities to expand my knowledge and understanding. I was chosen to be a member of the Supreme Court Institute for Teachers. I was the second Minnesotan chosen for that. I got to understand and study the Supreme Court at the Supreme Court. And that was rather unique. And I began to understand the courts work differently. I got to study George Washington at Mount Vernon with Professor Denver Brunsman, who's the Mount Vernon professor at George Washington University and a St. Olaf grad, so yeah. But I also got to study the Founding Fathers with Richard Brookshire at NYU, and he took us to Hamilton's house. So I began to understand that history is not just dates or events, but it's things that people lived and experienced or sacrificed for. And it's important for us to understand that our government makes that possible.
I've had another professor of history on the program, and his view is that it's the what and why of history, not the when and the dates and the names. It's like what happened and why did it happen is what's really important.
I'd say I would echo that. A lot of people have said to me, you know, I didn't like history because I couldn't learn all the dates. Yeah. And I don't care about the dates. I mean, order does matter.
The sequence of things, maybe.
The sequence matters, yeah. Absolutely. But it is the what, the why, and what for, and what were the consequences. Very oftentimes, history can take several different turns. You know, just because you start an event, it doesn't always end up like you think it should. Mm-hmm. And that's what history teaches us. So yes, I think the importance of the events is exactly what you want to understand. Why did it occur? And then what was the outcome? So let's go back to our Articles of Confederation. We set up a firm league of friendship. Everybody wants to shake hands. But no one wants to report to a national government. And then in Massachusetts, they have a rebellion. It was called Shays' Rebellion, Western Massachusetts. They raised the taxes on the farmers there 500%. I'm sure you wouldn't mind having a 500% tax raise.
Not quite.
And people rebelled. And they turned to the federal government and said, help us out. Daniel Shays had an army of 2,000. The federal government had an army of 500. They didn't have a way to settle this. They needed a stronger government. So the outcome was, you don't need to understand when Shays' Rebellion was, although it was 1786. But you need to understand that event said we need a different outcome, and we have to find a solution, and we need a better solution than the one we have.
So that's an example of what the citizenry can do if they're not happy with the government that they have.
Absolutely. And what they were saying was interesting, because Daniel Shays was saying no taxation without representation, and that sounded an awful lot like what they were saying at Boston when they had the Tea Party. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden it's 15 years later and the people in charge saying, wait a minute, maybe we didn't get this right. Let's take another swing.
So one or two things that would be the most important message or understanding that we could take from the history that we've had here in the United States. You know, we've got 4 or 5 minutes left in the program.
You need to be invested. We can't just think it's going to continue because it's always continued that way. So it's important to educate yourself, be aware of issues that are local, national too, but most government starts local. It's your town councils, it's your state government. Connect and get to know your representatives. Make your opinions heard. get involved with your school districts. 196 does a great job of involving families and parents. Of all the recognition or awards I ever received, I got inducted into the Hall of Fame for Parents at Eastview High School. I think I'm more proud of that than the presidential award I won, because it said I got involved and I cared. And I think people so often think, well, how do you get involved? You step forward and say, I can help and I want to help. And people like that because volunteer organizations make the difference.
And believing that you can make a difference is a motivation for people to get engaged, take ownership, take responsibility, but do it in an informed way.
Right.
You know?
And you don't want to be isolated. If you think that way, you've got to believe that other people think that way. It's interesting in the classroom, and people would say, well, I was afraid to ask that question while you were presenting or talking. And I like to go back to groups when I talk and say, if you have a question, I want you to ask it when it comes to your mind. Don't save it for the end because you might forget it or write it down. I said, if you have the question, you can believe that somebody else has that question as well. So let's get it out there and answer it. And it's remarkable because anytime somebody asks a question, one, it causes you to consider the answer, but oftentimes it helps you grow as well. I haven't thought about it quite that way before. Let's see if we can find that answer together.
Do you have a lot of participation in these programs that you're putting on for organizations?
Yeah, I think I do. I have a remarkable amount of participation. And it's interesting, if it's a class, the first night, maybe one or two people ask questions. But by the time we've met the sixth time, we've got a community talking to one another and wanting everybody else's opinions. The one great thing I thought about being a classroom teacher was that, yes, the teacher has the obligation, the responsibility for constructing the lesson plan, but one of the best ways to learn is from your peers and your contemporaries. So it's not just what the teacher has to say, but it's what the students have observed or have thought about and can share with one another. So it was great to talk and lecture, but that's actually the most ineffective form. I wanted them to take questions and talk to one another and then share.
Yeah, learn what other people are thinking.
Absolutely.
And what their perspective is. Frank, we've got less than a minute left on the program. Any final thoughts for our viewers?
It doesn't matter if you're young or you're old, you have a responsibility to be involved. You're never too old to learn something new, and be willing to share this with the next generation. We have a responsibility. We've had 250 years. So what is that? That's 10 generations. Let's get another 10 generations.
Let's keep it going.
Let's keep it going.
Frank, you're doing great work with the sharing of history that you're doing around our community here. We wish you very much success with continuing to do that. And thank you for being our guest on Access to Democracy and talking history with us.
It's been great to be here, and remember, history matters.
Thank you for watching. And the contact information for Frank is on the screen. So if you're interested, reach out to him.
Excellent.
Yeah.